Hello there, welcome to my channel. My name is Doug and I'm back with another Pen Resurrection Sunday video. Today I have a very interesting pen for you. This is a 1947 Parker 51, but it's the Demi size. Parker created the P51 in 1939, released it in 1941, and in 1947 they created a new version of it, and it was called the Demi. The only difference between a regular P51 Vacumatic is that the cap is slightly shorter, and the barrel from there to there, just from there to there, is shorter, giving the whole pen a rather stubby look. They only made this pen for about a year, from 1947 to 1948, when they replaced the Vacumatic system with the aerometric system. The regular P51 was relatively the same size, but the smaller version was called the Slender, and they completely redesigned it, so the whole thing was proportionally smaller. They eventually called that the Demi as well. So there's a big difference between two small pens. The Demi Vacumatic and the Demi Aerometric are completely different pens. The hood on the Demi Vacumatic is exactly the same size and can be replaced with a regular P51 hood. Same thing with the blind cap and the pump mechanism. They also made another change in 1947. They changed out the clip from the split arrow blue diamond clip to this longer, more elegant arrow that harkens back to the Parker Vacumatics of the early 1930s, designed by Joseph Platt. And this kind of clip continues on for decades for Parker, and you even see it today. It's actually incorporated in their logo. And so even though they made millions and millions of Parker 51s from 1941 through the 1960s, this particular model, the 1947 Parker 51 Demi Vacumatic, is relatively rare. And this is in that highly coveted dove gray color. This one is in pretty good shape, so let's take a look at it, triage it, see what it needs to come back to the land of the living and the writing. So looking at it from the top, we see the pearlescent top jewel in really good shape. The clip is in good shape, not bent, nicely springy. The band has vertical stripes, vertical engravings on it of parallel lines, and the back of the cap says, see if we can focus in here, 1/10 12K gold filled. Very substantial gold cap. There's lots of tarnish on this over the years, some abrasions over here. I'm going to try my best to polish this up like brand new. This gold-filled hardware from Parker from the mid-20th century is very resilient and comes back very nicely. Let's take off the cap and take a look at the nib. The nib looks like it's in really good shape. Doesn't look to be bent or anything. It's probably a fine. There's some abrasions around the hood. There's a nice gouge out of the hood right there that we'll have to polish out, and another one on this side. And it looks like it's fairly two-toned here. This happens when ink leaches into the lucite and changes the color, or ink sits in the cap over the years. We'll see how much polishing will take out that two-toned ink staining, but it's part of having a vintage Parker 51. The clutch ring is in good shape, and there should be an imprint right here. It's very, very faint. I'm not sure I'll be able to pick it up on camera. It says Parker 51, made in the USA, and there is a definite date code right where there it is, a 7 with no dots. So that's the fourth quarter of 1947. The barrel just has normal abrasion on it, no big gouges or anything. The end of the blind cap, no teeth marks to see, so whoever owned this pen was not a biter. A couple of gouges that will need to be polished out. And let's take off the blind cap, and we see the black celluloid rod of the pump, and it's very springy, but there's no resistance, so there's no diaphragm in there. A diaphragm will have to be installed, and we'll see whether we can get that pump out of that barrel. The first thing I want to do with this pen is just soak it in my ultrasonic jewelry cleaning machine in my own pen flush, which is 9 parts distilled water and 1 part ammonia. We'll do that for 2 or 3 minutes. Hopefully that will vibrate out some of the old ink in there and make it a little bit easier to get that hood off of there. And that'll be the first thing we try to do, is get the hood off. And here we are back out of the bath, just about 3 minutes. I've left the cap in for another 3 minutes. There's a lot of old ink inside that cap, and there's a lot of old ink inside this collector. Looks like blue-black. Now I'm going to get out a gripper here and my heat gun. Parker 51s are made of lucite, which is much more resistant to heat than celluloid is. And so you can apply a little bit more heat to this without it deforming. But again, go slowly, put it in the heat stream, test it, put it in the heat stream, and test it over and over again. And once that shellac that's sealing that hood down melts a little bit, it'll start to move for you. You want to catch it when that adhesive starts to melt, so you don't overheat. I'm going to use some finger cots here to protect my fingers from the heat stream, and let's go at this. Give it a try. A little bit more heat. There it goes. That was an easy one. Yeah, that's coming off really easy. There we are. There's the clutch ring. Take that off and get all that extraneous water out of there. And that looks fairly clean. And the nib is looking a little bit cleaner as well. So let's see whether we can get this collector out of here. No, it's solid in there. Probably ink. So I'm going to put this back in the bath for another 3 minutes and see whether I can clear out that old ink in there. Okay, 3 minutes in the bath. That collector has cleaned out most of that ink there. Give it a twist. There we go. And there's our collector and feed and nib. Still shedding ink. And let's see whether we can get the nib and feed out. There's the breather tube. Looks very short, but of course this is a shortened barrel, so you don't want that diaphragm inside the barrel to run into that breather tube. Let's see if we can get this nib out. There we go. Comes right out. And what about the feed? This is an Ebonite feed. Very fragile. Do not deflect it. Pull it straight out of the collector. There we go. And let's see if we can get the breather tube out of the Ebonite feed. Yep, there it goes. So that little breather tube is also celluloid. It's that amberish color. There's that amberish celluloid color. You can see. That'll take some cleaning. And let's take a look at the nib. We'll put it over here to see what it looks like before polishing. Lots of wear on it. And let's see what we can see in terms of an imprint. And we have Parker made in the USA. RU on this side for ruthenium. That's the tipping material. And 1948. So the pen was made in 1947, fourth quarter, and this nib was made in 1948. And let's take a look at the tines here if we can. And they look pretty good. They're completely aligned, and we'll see if there's any spacing between them. They seem to be touching each other right at the tip, so we'll do some flow adjustment with that to get them to be just slightly separate from each other. And here's the Ebonite feed. Lots of wear on it. We'll polish up just the visible part there. Make sure that that hole there is clear. That's the breather hole. It needs to be clear from there to there through into the breather tube. And here is the collector before it's cleaned up, all darkened with old ink. I'll keep this in the pen flush ultrasonic bath for quite a while to clean that up. It should come up brightly, I hope. Okay, here's the nib off the polishing wheel. Gonna put a cotton swab with the swab cut off it into the tubular nib and then give it a final polish on my jeweler's polishing cloth. That black that you see coming off is not dirt or ink. It is gold. Gold turns black, as any goldsmith will know. That's why your fingers turn black too. And let's put it on this side so you can see it in all of its glory. Isn't that beautiful? Just like brand new, like the day it was made, 1948. Probably the first quarter of 1948, all the way around. And here is the Ebonite feed, just the underside shined up, a little polishing compound, and a couple seconds on the buffer wheel. And there's the ink collector. It's looking a lot better. It's still ink stained. It's actually good enough to function properly. This is hard plastic, so it's not going to be affected by the ammonia in the bath. If I just left it in there for several hours, it'll brighten up a little bit more. But again, this is invisible in the pen, so you don't see it. As long as it's clean, it works fine. And here is the hood, blind cap, and the barrel body of the pen out of the pen flush. So we can put these parts aside for now. And let's see about getting that pump out of that barrel. And for that, I use this tool, which is the Parker Vac Extractor from the Inky Nib. This is the best tool that I know of for this job. This has paid for itself over and over again. I thank Scott Polly of the Inky Nib, from whom I bought this several years ago. So there's a collet. There's a large collet and a small one. The large one is for oversized Vacumatics. This one's for all others. Put it on the threads of the pump and then tighten the collet down as tight as it will go. And then we try to turn and see whether it'll come out. And usually it doesn't. So we need to apply a little bit of heat. And again, this is lucite, so it takes a little bit more heat than the celluloid of a Vacumatic pen. So don't apply as much heat to celluloid as you can with lucite. But again, always be careful. Heat and test and heat and test. And if you're not getting anywhere, put it back in the water, soak it for a long time, try again. Patience is the key. I do this in seconds in this video, but sometimes it takes a long, long time and a lot of patience. Oh, won't budge. Keep heating. Now it should be noted here that you're not melting any shellac. Usually, if someone has restored this pen and glued that pump in there, they're idiots.
You're an idiot.
You don't do that. Parker put these Vacumatic pumps in here friction fit with a tool similar to this one. And over the years, ink and being tight in there for many, many, many years has caused it to be seized up. And so the soaking and the heat will help expand that lucite and free it up so that the pump will turn. I think that's got it. Yeah, it's coming out. There we go. So that was just 2-3 minutes of heating and trying it, and the moment it expanded and allowed those threads to move, that's when you turn the heat off. Now at this point, I'm going to put those threads back on again just to stabilize. We don't want to break that celluloid rod, and the rest of the remains of that latex diaphragm in there is holding the whole pump together. And so you don't want to pull on it, otherwise you'll break that rod. So we're going to release the collet, release the Kraken.
Release the Kraken!
And then I'm going to push the remains of that old latex diaphragm out of there from the top using my block. So here's my knockout block, and we're going to find a place where it'll hold the barrel in place. Yeah, there we go. And the rest of it sinks down inside. And then I'm going to use one of my rods to gently push it out from the top so I don't damage the Ebonite pellet retainer. Sometimes you have to tap. There it goes. Just give it a little bit of pressure and push it out the other end. There it is. And so you can see the remains of the old latex diaphragm still holding on to the pellet retainer. See, but it's completely separated. That's all desiccated and old. Oh, and it pulled off. And there's the remnants of the latex. And the latex is actually very resilient right here, where it was pressing up on the inside of the barrel. That's what seals this unit inside the barrel, because that's beveled right there, and it sits on a seat and clamps itself in. So we can peel that remains of the old latex diaphragm off. There we go. And there's our pump, looking in really good condition. So the next thing that is happening here is that pellet that held that latex diaphragm into the pellet retainer is still in there. And so we need to drill that out of there. I have a tiny drill bit that I will drill a small hole in that little pellet, and then I'm going to use a dental tool to sort of tease it out of there without damaging that ebonite cup. And here's my tiny drill bit set. Got this on Amazon. Put that in my Dremel tool, and then I hold my drill flat on my mat and hold the ebonite cup as firmly as I can so that I don't slip. And I'm going to use my magnifying lenses to do some precise work here. You see all those white threads coming out there? That's the celluloid of that pellet. I have a cheap set of dental tools I got on Amazon, and we take the pick and see if we can tease that pellet out of there. Okay, this is taking a while. Well, that took a bit of time. I finally got it out. I had to grind it almost to dust, and I broke a drill bit on it. So at least it's in really good shape. So we're going to clean out that barrel. There are remnants of the old diaphragm in there. We'll take my little dental scraper here and carve out some of the remnants of that old desiccated latex diaphragm and use a plastic test tube cleaning brush to make sure that barrel is just a spick and span clean. And there you can see all the remains of the old diaphragm stuck to the inside of that barrel. And there we got all the chunks of petrified latex diaphragm out of there. And now the barrel looks as clean as a whistle. So I seem to have gotten a little bit inside out, upside down on my recording. Here I was recording when I thought I was off and not recording when I thought I was recording. What happened was I tried to push a new diaphragm into that pellet retainer, and the ebonite just absolutely cracked on me. You can see a little shard of it to the right. And so I'm looking to replace that ebonite retainer, and I was lucky enough to have some extras. And the reason I'm not crying right now is because I had the foresight to go ahead and purchase a number of ebonite replacements from Pen Tooling, knowing that I would be a klutz in the future and I would break one of these, as I have in the past. So now what's the process, Professor Doug? Well, the process is we have to break the rest of that ebonite off of the tip of that plunger. That's a celluloid rod right there and a spring. So I'm going to break it all up with some pliers here into pieces until I just get the rod by itself, and then we'll glue a new ebonite retainer on the end of that rod. We don't want to break the rod. So I did a little bit there. I'm going to get my eyes on and do this slowly and carefully. There, I got it all off of there, but that celluloid tip is really kind of crushed. I'm hoping that there will be enough purchase place there for me to glue the new one on and retain that spring. Otherwise, I'd have to replace the rod too. So I'm going to apply some CA glue, cyanoacrylate glue, to that celluloid and the ebonite, and we're going to replace that receptacle so that it works just like that. So no time like the present. Let's get out some CA glue, set it right like that. I'm just going to put a little dab of CA glue inside that ebonite retainer, just like that, and a little bit right here on the tip of the celluloid, and then we'll push them together while holding that spring back. Not easy. There we go, all cleaned up, but now it's working just fine. It's attached, and we can put a new diaphragm in there. I'm going to let that cure for about an hour or so before I put any pressure on it, just to be on the safe side. Okay, replacing the diaphragm, part 2, take 2. Let's see, we get a satisfying click or an unsatisfying painful crunch this time. And give it a push and hope, and a click. You didn't hear it, I did. I'm going to peel this back until this edge gets all the way to there. Okay, so we're going to keep this pellet pusher pushed up against the pellet, and we're going to push down the pellet pusher like a mandrel and tease it down to try to bridge that gap from there to there, and then unkink it by pushing it back through the other side. So I get that part up on that aluminum seat right there, all the way around, and then we hold it there, and we're going to give it a push from the other side. Try to get it to unkink. There we go. Yay, I did it. And there we go. That's the way it's supposed to look. That's the way it's supposed to work, just like that. You can see it extending outwards and back. Well, that was more difficult than it needed to be. You'd think they'd improved this design since 1947, but no. So let's see about putting this back in the barrel. So we'll need our vac extractor tool. We put the collet on the threads like that. We're going to put a little bit of silicone oil just along the leading edge of that latex cuff, just like that, so that the latex turns inside the barrel, doesn't twist while I'm turning the threads in. And I'm going to put a little silicone oil on those threads as well. Just allow them to slide nicely into the barrel with not a lot of pressure. And we tease that forward part into the barrel. It just sort of pops in, and then we can turn those threads. But it's spinning inside that barrel so that it's not twisting. There we go. We put the collet on, tighten it down like that, and then we give the barrel a hand-tight twist. There. Remove the collet, and that should be functioning. So here we get out our little inspection camera here, go down inside the barrel and give it a couple of pumps, and you see that it's working correctly. So now we're going to reassemble this pen. I've had the collector soaking for several hours, and it's looking a lot cleaner. So we can assemble the nib, feed, and breather tube. Let's put the breather tube back in the feed. There we go. Always blow through it once just to make sure that airway is clear. And then we put the nib on the feed, grab it with a gripper material, and we place it in the collector, making sure the broad channel, there's a broad channel and a small channel. There's the broad channel right there, and there's the small channel. So make sure the broad channel is on the top of the nib. So there's the top of the nib there. So the broad channel goes to the top like that. The small channel to the bottom. I line up that small channel with the slit in the nib, and we give it a push until it stops. There. Check the nib for alignment, making sure it's aligned correctly. It is. And then we put this back in the barrel. Now, the key here, and make sure we put the clutch rig on. There we go. The key here is getting this aligned properly. And you do that by trial and error. So let's put the hood back on again and see where it ends up. And there, the hood should be around this end. So I'm going to take my thumb and I'm just going to point it at where the tip of the hood ends up. So my thumb is in line with the top of the hood, and we're going to unscrew it, and we're going to turn that collector around until I think it's close. And I went a little bit far, so just a little bit further back, just a smidge. It's a technical term. A smidge is a half a mite, I think. And just a little bit of a click. Put it back on again, and it needs another mite, half a smidge. I'm OCD, so that's slightly just a quarter of a smidge of a half of a mite, or a quarter of a mite, a half of a smidge, I don't know, just a little click. There, that's done it. Now that I've got it where it's perfect, I'm going to take that hood off again, because I'm going to have this on and off of this pen a few times, and I don't want to have to repeat that exercise. And I'm going to take my X-Acto blade, using my magnifying lenses. I'm going to take that large channel and just make two small scratches in the end of that barrel where I can see them. No one else will see that, just me. There we go. Maybe you can see that now there too. Those two little scratches lined up with those notches, bonus notches, and it will screw down perfectly every single time from now on. Now what we need to do is do a capacity test on this pen with some water, and we measure the pen like this. And we press tear, take the blind cap off. I'm going to pump this several times until I'm absolutely sure it's completely full of ink. Sorry, water. And then we'll measure it again. So let's measure it again. 1.46 milliliters of ink. That's excellent for a tiny pen. For comparison, this Leonardo Momento Zero Grande fountain pen takes 1.5 milliliters of ink. And look how big it is compared to this tiny pen. So that's amazing. So I'm going to dump this water out now, and I'm going to do a dip test on that nib to see whether it needs any tuning. Okay, so before I work on tuning this nib, I'm going to give a little bit of an update to my usual method of tuning a nib, because since coming back from the Dutch Pen Show in Utrecht, where I delivered a workshop on how to restore vintage fountain pens, I met nib aficionado Lenny Geiger, who was delivering a workshop on tuning nibs, sort of back to back with my workshop. So I wasn't able to take his, but he went through the whole process with me as well individually, and he's got a video up now on YouTube, and I'm going to put a link to it right up there so you can click on it and see Lenny talking about it himself. But I'm going to summarize and talk about the ways that I'm changing my method slightly to adapt to Lenny's method, and so I'm going to follow his lead. Now, you've heard me many times talk about the micro mesh chart here. This is for polishing up celluloid and ebonite and all kinds of other plastics and things on pen surfaces, but I've always used the top two grits, 8,000 and 12,000, as I was taught by my nib guru Jack Hernandez, to use the 8,000 and 12,000 to polish your nib to a very, very smooth texture. I've also done a video on how to use the various grits of micromesh to polish out baby's bottom, which actually is a process that removes tipping material quite substantially, so it has to be done carefully and gently. Now, Lenny doesn't believe in micromesh for nib tuning, and so I'm going to not use micromesh anymore. What he does is he uses lapping sheets, and so here's the lapping sheet that he's giving me, two of them. The green one is 14,000 grit. That is like 1 micron. And the white is 60,000. So that's exponentially more fine and smooth. But the first thing he does is he makes sure that the nib has a flow. So first thing, making sure that the nib has flow. That means that the tines are slightly separated at the very tip. He talks about how when they stamp the nib and produce the nib at the factory, by the time you get it, that nib may have grown itself back together again just through metal memory, because that metal remembers where it used to be, and when you stamp it, it wants to go back to its original shape after you received your new pen. Everybody blames the pen company. It's actually just the material actually grows back together again. And so he uses a series of 2 feeler gauges. Now, I've always used feeler gauges as well. This is a spark plug gapping tool right here. It has all kinds of different thicknesses. I've also used a technique which I called 7 strokes to inky happiness, where I've taken a steel nib and given it a push. Lenny doesn't believe in those approaches because you can overdo it, and you can actually spring the nib by pushing those tines out, and they don't want to come back again. So he uses 2 different feeler gauges. And the cool thing about these feeler gauges is he's beveled them. So this goes from 0.10 here, and he's thinned it out at this end to very, very, very thin, wafer thin.
It's only a wafer thin.
And the same thing on the 15. He's ground them on a grinder so that they're like wedges. And so you can move that wedge into the slit of the nib to make sure that it has a space. So how can you tell it has a space? Well, you have to look at it with your loupe. And so when you look at it with a loupe like this, you might not be able to tell. Sometimes having a light behind the nib helps, and you can see with your loupe whether there is any gap between those tines. And if there is no gap, then you take the smallest tool and you run it down the breather hole and through the tine straight through without tilting it this way or that way or bending it, just straight through like that. With a hooded nib like this, you can't get at that nib unless you have the hood off. So I'm going to do my Lenny impersonation here, and I'm going to put the wedge end of that tool in the breather hole, and is meeting no resistance right there because it's wider at this end, going straight down into that slit, and I start feeling the resistance as the wedge gets thicker back here. I'm going down at a bit of an angle like that, but I'm keeping it straight. So we want to make sure that it's absolutely straight. We can run through and sort of leave it there where it wants to sit, just like that, for a minute or so, and then we'll check our work and see whether I've got a gap. and this will make the nib nicely wet and flow well. Maybe you can see that there on that tip, you can see daylight right at the start of the tines there. I can see daylight. That's exactly what I want. So the next thing Lenny wants you to look at, once you've got the flow, you got the tines separated right at the tip by a tiny, tiny amount, then you want to check to make sure that the tines are aligned properly. And I'm going to draw a little diagram here to show how the tines should be aligned. If you look straight on at the tip of your nib, it would be a ball, and there would be a split right there. That's what I just created, that gap. And the tines should be completely aligned along there. If your tines look like this, then when you're on the paper, this edge right here is going to scratch when you move sideways, when you move that way, because that edge is going to catch paper. So you have to make sure that that tine and that tine are aligned perfectly. And you do that with a loop. And the best way to tell is check what your writing angle is. Now Lenny says he has about a 45-degree writing angle. I have slightly less than that, about a 40-degree, I think, angle. So I'm going to look at that angle that I am to the page, and I'm going to reproduce that angle by tilting the nib at that angle towards my loop. And that's how you can check the actual surface of that nib that's touching the page at your writing angle. So I'm going to do that right now. And at my writing angle, it looks perfectly aligned. If it wasn't perfectly aligned, we use a tool called fingernails. That's from Lenny. And we push the one tine that's low up, or the one tine that's high down, until they are aligned. Also, you got to make sure that you're aligned on the feed properly, because the feed might push one of the tines up. So make sure you're aligned on the feed, and then we can take our nib without any ink, and we can go on our paper and move it back and forth, and we can feel whether we have any scratch. You have to make sure you're aligned before you apply any micromesh, any of these lapping sheets. This is 14,000 grit, and I'm just going to go side to side like this, up and down. Again, I've got my pen in the angle that I write to the page. We're going to go at 45-degree angles like this. We can go left circles, right circles, figure eights, the infinity symbol, figure eights in this direction, just like that, and then give it a try. And that's feeling very smooth. I'm going to go up to the 60,000 because Lenny says this is the shit. This is the bomb right here. I'm going to give this a try in my verticals, my horizontals. Again, I'm not using a lot of pressure, and we go at the 45s like so, circles, circles, infinity, in figure eights, and that's now feeling like glass on that page. Lenny has a technique that he shows in his video where he goes like this, and he rolls the nib to the right, and he rolls the nib to the left, just to get those edges when you might roll the nib. And that's feeling glorious right now. Parker 51, and it is a Demi, and I would say this is an extremely fine nib, extra fine. And I'm also finding that there's still a bit of tooth several minutes later. This nib had a lot of corrosion on it, and so I went actually back to 8,000 grit and 12,000 grit, and then went through the lapping sheets, 14,000, 60,000. Got this nib writing smooth in all directions now, and it's a little bit wetter now than it was. I'm going to continue to try to make it wetter just by spreading those tines out, but these nibs are not known as being wet writers anyway. But now it's very smooth, and I think it's a little bit thicker as well. So we got a 0.25 to 0.3 millimeter extra fine nib. So now that I've got the pen working, yay, I'm going to take the nib unit out of there and polish the hood and the barrel, and then we're going to get after that cap. If the 1500 grit won't take that gouge out, which I don't expect it will, I'm going to use some 400 grit flexible sandpaper on those spots. And here we are with the barrel and the hood all polished up like brand new. All those gouges are gone on the hood, and there was a scratch on the blind cap as well, but it's gone. And the imprint is still there. There's the Made in the USA, Parker 51. And here is the cap, all polished up. I put it on the buffer for a bit, but did most of the buffing with my jeweler's cloth and just elbow grease. I didn't remove that clip. I was able to polish it all up without removing the clip. It wouldn't budge, and it's good to have it tight. We just have to put the nib unit in it, and we'll be done. And here it is out of the bath. Take the hood off. We're going to put the nib unit in, and I'm going to look for those couple of marks that I scratched in it. So I'm going to line that up as best I can and then get my loop on it. There, it looks to be bang on right now, so let's give that a try and see if I'm correct. Yep, bang on. So I'll just back it off a little bit. We'll add some silicone oil to those threads. And one of the benefits of doing the final buff and polish with the clutch ring on is that you get the clutch ring all polished up beautifully. It just shines. Yeah, that's perfect. And see how that clutch ring just shines like it's brand new. And there's our pen. So what are my thoughts about this pen resurrection? I have to remind myself not to say things like, oh, this one's going to be easy, because every time I think that, and I should really stop thinking that, it comes back to bite me somehow. Just like Rosanna Dana always said, it only goes to show. It's always something.
Well, Jen, it just goes to show you. It's always something. If it's not one thing, it's another.
So the pump came out of this pen very nicely. I looked at the nib and it looked like, oh, this is going to be a nice nib. This is going to be a nice writer. There was nothing severely wrong with this pen, just a lot of tarnish. There were some gouges out of the hood. I got those out. The pump, as I say, came out very nicely, but then I broke the pellet retainer, and that's a pain. But thank God for Dale Beebe and Pen Tooling, because he sells these replacement Ebonite pellet retainers for $10 each, and I got a few of them because I'm klutzy like that. It seems like they break 1 in 4, so I had those. And the nib looked like it was okay, but then when I started working with it, it needed a lot of tuning. And I got to thank my new friend, Lenny Eiger, for giving me his expertise and giving me a couple of these lapping sheets, 60,000, 14,000, and these 2 feeler gauges, and the expertise to really fine-tune these nibs. This one went from fairly scratchy and very, very dry to relatively wet for a hooded nib pen and a nice steady writer. So thank you, Lenny. And as I mentioned before as well, this is a relatively rare pen for a Parker 51. It's a Parker 51 Demi Vacumatic, and they were only made from 1947 to 1948. And this is a lovely small writer. Now I say it's small. Let's take a look and see what it looks like against a standard size Parker 51. This is an aerometric, and you can see how much smaller it is. And of course the Vacumatic version was rather stubby because they shortened the barrel, but nothing else. When they came out with the aerometric in 1948, they made a Demi size as well, but they just proportionally shrunk the pen, the cap, the barrel, and the hooded section, so that it looked proportional. But I really like the look of this stubby little Vacumatic Demi, and it's turned into a really lovely writer. So even though this threw me a couple of curves, I'm pleased with the way it turned out. If you're interested in purchasing this pen, I'm selling it for $175 US plus shipping. So send me an email at inkquiringminds@gmail.com with your name and your address, and I'll get you a shipping quote and instructions on how to pay via PayPal. And there you have it. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell to get instant notifications whenever a new video is posted. And you can join as a member of my channel for only 99 cents a month. I guarantee I'll answer your comments in the comments section, and you'll get cool emojis, badges, sneak peek unboxing videos, as well as instant access to my videos the moment I post them. And if you're a basic member at 99 cents a month, you'll get 10% off pen purchases like this. At the patron level of $5 a month, you'll get 20% off these purchases. And that just leaves it for me to say, thank you for watching And that's all she wrote.
I made this.